Hello everyone. Welcome to the news on December 16, 2022. The first one is Poland-related news. Poland capitulates to EU on Ukraine funding. Warsaw has been accused of creating a hostage situation by leveraging Kiev aid for a tax deal. The Polish government gave in to EU pressure on Thursday and dropped its opposition to a package of policies that involves millions of euros in aid to Ukraine, Politico reported, citing diplomatic sources in Brussels. Warsaw is still feuding with 6 Western European countries over sanctions impacting Russian fertilizer exports to Africa, however. At issue was a package deal that involved €18 billion, $19 billion, in aid to Kiev, freezing €6.3 billion in EU funding to Budapest until Hungary completes reforms demanded by Brussels, and agreeing to the US-championed minimum corporate tax rate. Having previously agreed to the package, Poland tried to have the tax plan considered separately, according to the outlet. There's a lot of frustration with Poland jeopardizing Ukraine aid by blocking the minimum tax, an unnamed EU diplomat told Politico on Wednesday, describing the move as another hostage-taking situation. It's like an abusive relationship. They keep promising it will be different next time, but deep down we know we will get hurt over and over again, said another EU diplomat. By Thursday afternoon, however, Polish PM Mateusz Morawiecki dropped his objections. He has also capitulated to Brussels on the rule of law issue at home, signaling on Wednesday that Poland will change the disciplinary rules for judges in order to comply with EU directives and unblock millions in funding. The European Commission has held up €35 billion in pandemic recovery grants and loans until Poland submits. Morawiecki's Law and Justice Party, PIS, has proposed a bill that would move the disciplinary matters to another top court, which the EU regards as more independent of the government. His coalition partners may not support it, and the opposition is in no rush to throw Morawiecki a lifeline, however. Nor is it a given that the bill would be enough to mollify Brussels. Warsaw continues to be obstinate on the matter of sanctions against Russia, however. With the backing of the 3 Baltic states, Poland wants to maintain the existing embargo on Russian shipping, while Belgium, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Portugal and Spain have proposed easing the restrictions on fertilizer exports, arguing it increases the danger of famine in Africa. Next newsletter is Putin-related news. Putin says Russia will reroute more gas to Asia. Export volumes may reach nearly 90 billion cubic meters by 2030. Eastbound supplies of Russian natural gas will continue to grow and could hit almost 90 billion cubic meters by the end of this decade, President Vladimir Putin said on Thursday at a meeting of the Strategic Development and National Projects Council. He said the development of port and pipeline infrastructure to the south and east would be an important step to mitigate the impact of Western sanctions and other hostile actions against Russia. Implementation of such projects as the Kovyktisko field, the Power of Siberia 2 and the Far Eastern route will make it possible to increase gas supplies to the east to 48 billion cubic meters by as early as 2025 and to 88 billion by 2030, Putin said. This would actually amount to more than 60% of gas supplies to the west in 2021, he noted. According to the president, new liquefied natural gas, LNG, projects in Russia's Yamal region will make it possible to increase LNG production by 70 billion cubic meters, which will also allow for the diversification of export destinations. Next newsletter is EU-related news. EU buying more Russian goods despite sanctions. The bloc has been boosting purchases from Russia while banning their own exports to the country, the Russian president says. EU countries have been ramping up imports of Russian goods this year despite the numerous rounds of sanctions the bloc has introduced against Moscow, President Vladimir Putin said on Thursday. During his meeting with the Council for Strategic Development and National Projects, Putin argued that the EU continues to consume Russian goods, but holds back on supplying its own products to Russia. According to the president, this situation cannot continue indefinitely, so Russia will be looking for new partners. It's interesting to observe that, despite the sanctions, over the first 9 months of this year, deliveries of basic goods to the EU increased by 1.5 times. As a whole, exports increased by 42%, while the trade surplus was up 2.3 times, to $138 billion, Putin said. Next newsletter is Zelensky-related news. Zelensky-founded studio under fire for blasphemy. A comedy show's attack on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church crossed the line into spiritual war, the institution has said. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church, UOC, has lashed out at a comedy studio that once boasted now President Vladimir Zelensky among its stars and co-owners, alleging that actors made offensive remarks about the institution. The Bayraktar news show, produced by the Kvartal 95, District 95, studio, purports to cover national news in a humorous way. The UOC was the predominant subject in its latest episode, with hosts claiming the church is a corrupt organization full of agents of Russia. The Ukrainian government is currently investigating the UOC for alleged ties with Russia. A UOC statement claimed on Wednesday that the episode was drenched with blasphemy and mocked not only the church, but also faith in God per se, and thus it offended the religious feelings of all Christians in our nation. In one scene, the hosts reported that a young man in Ukraine had been fined $3 for cursing at a UOC priest, commenting that it was a small price to pay for harassing the clergy. The routine went on to suggest a price list for acts, such as spitting at a priest, nailing the Holy Scripture to an SUV, used by one, and hitting one, on the left cheek, and automatically on the right one too. Kicking the UOC out of Ukraine is priceless, the joke concluded, paraphrasing the famous MasterCard ad campaign. A message in the name of clergy and lay people, which was published by the UOC's press office online, urged the studio to remove the content. The church said it would consider a declaration of spiritual war against its multi-million congregation, and act accordingly if the episode is not pulled. It also announced filing a criminal complaint against Kvartal, arguing that the episode incited hatred against the faithful. The SBU, Ukraine's domestic security agency, has conducted raids on UOC properties since mid-November, in what critics have called a politically motivated campaign. The church has historical ties with the Russian Orthodox Church, and remains the biggest religious institution in the country. Next newsletter is Germany-related news. Germany spending $500 billion to keep the lights on. Berlin's massive energy subsidies may not be enough to cope with economic effects of the Ukraine crisis, Reuters says. Germany has reportedly allocated nearly $500 billion to shore up its energy supplies and keep the lights on since the Russia-Ukraine conflict began last February, but the spending binge might not be enough to weather the crisis. The estimated total cost reflects the cumulative scale of energy bailouts and other schemes that Berlin has employed amid surging oil and natural gas prices and the loss of imports from Russia, Reuters reported on Thursday. The outlet called the various subsidies an energy bazooka, equating to $5,400 per resident in Germany, 12% of GDP and an estimated $1.6 billion per day since the conflict in Eastern Europe began, adding that still more spending may be needed. The economic effects of the conflict stem largely from anti-Russia sanctions imposed by the US, Germany and other NATO members. Despite Western efforts to punish and isolate Moscow, Russian government revenue from oil and gas exports has more than doubled in a year to 10 trillion rubles, about $160 billion, in 2022's first 11 months. Over the same period, rising energy earnings helped push the government budget surplus to 557 billion rubles. However, as Reuters noted, Europe's biggest economy now finds itself at the mercy of the weather. Energy rationing is a risk in the event of a long cold spell this winter, Germany's first in half a century without Russian gas, the outlet pointed out. Stefan Kuetz, vice president at Germany's Kiel Institute for the World Economy, said uncertain energy supplies have pushed the country's economy to a very critical phase. He added, "Where does the German economy stand? If we look at price inflation, it has a high fever." Thank for watching. Please click like and subscribe for new update.